The Cinema of Robert Altman, Hollywood Maverick by Robert Niemi. The best laid plans. Okay, on the back it says, like a great Altman movie, this marvelously creative study takes in an extraordinary amount of artistic, cultural, philosophical, and psychological territory, illuminating fine details without losing sight of the big picture in all its complexity, ambiguity, and allure. This is auteur study at its lucid, accessible best. That's by David Sterrett, Professor Emeritus, Long Island University, Editor, Robert Altman Interviews, 2000. There's probably no need to read what else is written on the back, apart from about the author. Robert Niemi is Professor of English at St Michael's College, Colchester, Vermont. He is the author of History in the Media, Film and Television, 2006. The Ultimate Illustrated Beats Chronology, 2011. And Inspired by True Events, an illustrated guide to more than 500 history-based films, 2013. Preface. Writing a book on Robert Altman can be daunting, even scary. A daunting, even scary undertaking. Ever since he started attracting notice in the late 1960s, up until his death in 2006 and beyond, some 20 books and hundreds of articles and reviews have been published on Altman and his uneven but magnificent body of work. What would justify another book on Altman? What can one say about this legendary American film director that has not already been said, and said well, by so many others? That question dogged me during the early tentative stages of this project. Gradually, after a lot of thought and research and a number of false starts and conceptual dead ends, a realization began to take shape. It occurred to me that there has been altogether too much emphasis placed on the two most obvious aspects of Altman's career: as an innovative cinematic artist and as Hollywood's enfant terrible, an untamed and unrepentant rebel against film industry business practices and aesthetic conventions. Both these perspectives have great merit, of course, but it seems to me neither is sufficiently political in its deepest and most integrated sense of the term. Focusing on Altman's artistic wizardry, or his lifelong battle against purely commercial filmmaking imperatives, tends to obscure another and arguably more trenchant point of view, the one that considers Robert Altman as a social critic, or, to put it in more specific terms, a relentless debunker and demystifier of America's dominant ideology. The winner-takes-all ideology of patriarchal capitalism. Though putatively meritocratic and fair-minded, our long-reigning American dream ethos has always been something of a hypocritical farce. Beneath all the carefully contrived and cheerful advertising that bombards the citizenry every day, cynicism, ruthlessness, and a hyper-individualistic code of social Darwinism prevails. One that fetishizes personal wealth, success, and fame without too many qualms about the manner of attainment or any other considerations, e.g. community, democracy, compassionate other-directedness, or the cultivation of a genuinely creative inner life that stands apart from the single-minded pursuit of money. Unbridled artistic freedom and restless experimentation were Altman's hallmarks, but, as I will argue here, his motivating passion was to comment on the state of modern American society and the thinking individuals relation to that society. Of the many books written on Altman, 4 of them subject varying parts of his body of work to penetrating ideological critique. Helen Kaiser's Robert Altman's America, 1991. Robert T. Self's Robert Altman's Subliminal Reality, 2002. Robert Kolker's The Cinema of Loneliness, 2011. And A Companion to Robert Altman, 2015, edited by Adrian Danks. Kaiser's monograph offers many valuable insights, but is somewhat prolix. But is somewhat prolix, and is now dated, as it does not include coverage of Altman's last dozen films. Self's impressive study manifests a remarkable mastery of postmodern critical discourse, but covers only 21 of Altman's 36 films in depth, and tends to concentrate on formal and aesthetic concerns related to art cinema, i.e. filmmaking that defies Hollywood's classic norms. Kolker's excellent book, updated over 4 editions between 1980 and 2007, does cover Altman's entire oeuvre and is easily the best written, but does not have quite the necessary depth and detail insofar as discussion of Altman constitutes just one chapter of a book that also deals with half a dozen other major American directors. A Companion to Robert Altman is a superb compilation of 23 critical essays by various film theorists and critics, largely from historicist and ideological perspectives, but it concentrates on about 15 of those celebrated Altman films and other topic areas as well, e.g. his early television career and his the critical reception of his work. Sweat. All of these works are of estimable value, but there is, I think, still room for the book before you, a fairly comprehensive ideological survey of Altman's work, rendered more or less chronologically, academically rigorous, but also aimed toward a more general audience, and one that delves into Altman's work not merely as a series of filmic texts to be dissected in the abstract, but as experiments in filmmaking conducted in the real world against generally hostile market forces. Accordingly, this book examines how Altman chose projects, how he adapted them from source material, how, when, and where he developed, financed, and shot them, how they were received, and to what effect, given the politico-cultural context that prevailed at the time. Robert Altman was a naturalistic filmmaker, avid to get his art as close to life as possible. He was, moreover, an intellectual without intellectualist pretensions, a misanthrope who was paradoxically also a compassionate student of the human condition, and very much an artist in search of creative magic and a genuine sense of community. The present study tries to do justice to these sorts of qualities and concerns. Well, it sounds like a pretty good book to me. So it's as good as it says. Introduction. Page 1. There's a quote by Altman at the start. Well, I don't have any goals. I consider myself an artist, and I don't have anything to say. I just show what I see. This is the way it looks to me. Okay, here we go. Andrew Sarris, the leading proponent of auteur theory, famously averred that the strong director imposes his own personality on a film. The weak director allows the personalities of others to run rampant. 1966-31. Sarris, writing just before Robert Altman emerged on the scene, did not foresee a third counterintuitive possibility, that the strong director might allow the personalities of others healthy amounts of creative freedom and still be a strong director, perhaps all the stronger for it. Over the course of a career that spanned nearly 4 decades, Robert Altman departed from Hollywood's quasi-directorial tradition by regularly inviting talented actors and craftspeople to make meaningful, even critical, contributions to his films. He also deconstructed or satirized Hollywood's genre conventions and cookie-cutter narrative formulae in favor of heterogeneous structures, codes, and languages in a style of filmmaking that, in the words of Robert T. Self, tended to threaten, delimit, and define the apparent unity sought by dominant strains of auteur criticism. There you go. Not many people can do that. 2002. Okay. Accordingly, in his book, Robert Altman's Subliminal Reality, Self eschewed an auteur-centered approach to Altman in favour of a structuralist examination of Altman's major films in order to show how they both adhere to and embody characteristics of art cinema narration. While acknowledging that Self's approach to Altman and his films makes good sense, and that the auteur concept is problematic because filmmaking is a highly collaborative enterprise, I would argue that Altman's rejection of Hollywood's cherished narrative classicism in favour of destabilising multifariousness of form and content still constitutes a distinctive directorial style, albeit a style that suggests the need for a subversive revision of auteur theory, at least in Altman's case. What follows then is an auteur-centered historicist approach to Altman that draws on psychoanalytic, Marxist, feminist and structural theory and acknowledges the special challenges Altman's case poses to the director as author paradigm. Altman's background. Page 2. Robert Altman was born on 20th of February 1925 in Kansas City, Missouri, which he later described as a rather uneventful American middle-class community. In Zuckoff, 2009, Altman had, by his own account, an ordinary, untraumatic childhood. His father, Bernard Clement, B.C. Altman, 1901 to 1978, was a highly successful insurance salesman, but was also a womanizer and compulsive gambler and something of a con man. Zuckoff, 2009. According to his third wife, Catherine, Altman was influenced by a lot by his dad and his dad's behaviour. Zuckoff, 2009. As Altman told interviewer Algian Harmetz, I learned a lot about losing from him, that losing is an identity, that you can be a good loser and a bad winner, that none of it, gambling, money, winning or losing, has any real value, the value you thought came with winning $10,000 simply isn't there, that it's simply a way of killing time, like crossword puzzles. Sterrett, 2000. Patrick McGilligan asserts that Altman came to emulate his father. Like BC, he became the outgoing con salesperson of the mischievous charmer, the incessant gambler and scandalous womanizer. But at the same time, unhappily, Altman grew remote from his father. Robert T. Self and Terry F. Robinson argue that the biography of Altman's professional career indicates that Altman's antipathy to producers, writers and stars derives from his never-resolved feelings of inferiority and insecurity around the imposing and threatening figure of his father. BC, 2000. Self and Robinson go on to observe that Altman's films are rife with images of dominating or absent fathers. On the other hand, his mother, Helen, née Matthews, Altman, a Mayflower descendant from Nebraska, was, according to Altman's high school girlfriend, Jerry Steinhoff, the sweetest, most considerate, charming lady. In Zuckoff, 2009. She and Altman's two younger sisters, Joan and Barbara, evidently provided feminine nurturance and gentility to counter BC's brash, self-centered ways. Another major influence was Glenn Majors, a wise, tough-minded but kind African-American maid who served as confidant and intermediary between young Bobby and his parents. According to Altman's friend, Helen Belafonte, Glenn also opened him up on race. He'd see through her eyes. She played an important part in his growing up, maturing, and in that maturity found his center. Zuckoff, 2009. Majors also introduced Altman to jazz music, a legacy he would showcase in Kansas City, 1996. In some unusually comfortable circumstances of female love and stability, leaving male adventurousness to produce the more or less confident, assertive, risk-tolerant extrovert that was Robert Altman. But these two ingrained polarities empathy and other directedness, on the other hand, and an inveterate gambling instinct, on the other, were in tenuous balance and made for a complex, conflicted personality, at once intense, amicable, but also restless, proud, sensation-seeking, and highly individualistic. As McGilligan notes, Altman's self-image was as a lone wolf and an outsider, a maverick, a gadfly, a posturer above the fray. 1989. Self and Robinson note that Altman's films tend to explore a troubled masculinity perceived as a refusal, a fear, a lack, a breakdown, a violation of authority. Together with the exploration of the displacement of women from roles in social power and control, these films develop a subjectivity of the guilty male, insecure and defensive, in retreat from the very phallic authority to which by his gender and tradition of modernism he is naturally heir. 2000. The troubled masculinity and empathy for women that runs through much of Altman's work obviously emanated from Altman's vexed relationship with his father. We're on page 3 now. Another key formative element in Altman's upbringing was his Catholicism. His parents, both staunch Catholics, enrolled him at St. Peter's School, a Catholic parochial school in Kansas City, which he attended from 1931 to 1938, ages 6 to 13. Altman also briefly attended Rockhurst High School, a Jesuit institution, before transferring to Southwest High School, a public school, and then attending Wentworth Military Academy in Lexington, Missouri, from which he graduated in 1943. Though Altman was denied the Catholic influence, his years at St. Peter's and Rockhurst were undoubtedly crucial in the formation of his personality. Catholic schools not only provided a solid educational foundation, but also instilled in him self-discipline, a strong work ethic, and an elevated moral awareness, attributes that would serve him well for the rest of his life. As he matured, Altman rejected the church's social and sexual conservatism and would later ridicule religion in some of his films. MASH, 70, McCabe, Mrs. Miller, 71, A Wedding, 1978. Though he renounced Catholicism, Altman remained a normal Catholic. He had his children baptized and appears to have struggled all his life with the nagging, nebulous sense of guilt that most Catholics, lapsed or not, tend to experience. His biographer, Patrick McGilligan, reports that Altman's friend, John Stevens, believed Altman to be very conflicted about his Catholic upbringing, and guilty still for having torn himself away from it. He was fighting against it. Anyone with a strong Catholic upbringing who breaks away from it will always have those guilt feelings as to whether or not they're really doing the right thing. Once you're exposed, once you're taught, you can say nothing. You can say anything you want to say about what you don't believe. But what is it you don't believe? 1989. Paul Giles argues that a residual element of cultural Catholicism is embedded in the formalistic patterns of Altman's movies. 1991. As evidenced by the preponderance of ritual moments in Altman's films, e.g. weddings and funerals. Giles also notes that the Catholic imagination tends to be analogical, a mode of thinking that stresses the interpretation of unity and multiplicity, sameness and difference. For example, a wedding formalistically and thematically emphasizes analogies and resemblances among the heterogeneous groups of people. Furthermore, the central theme of Brewster McCloud, 1970, is the communal nature of social life, the necessary sharing and indeed interchangeability of human characteristics, 1991. In sum, Giles sees Altman and America's other great Catholic film director, John Ford, as rejecting the dialectic of good and evil, opting instead for an all-embracing universalism. Their styles of filmmaking, with a heavy emphasis on ritual and a consequent tendency to disrupt and dislocate the solipsistic vision of any other individual character, function as a corollary to this thematic impulse. 1991. Indeed, it takes no great leap of imagination to see that Altman's fondness for ensemble work and his affinity for decentered multi-protagonist films that downplay the role of the individual hero derive from a communitarian ethos that Catholicism imbued within him. Still more critical than his parents' influence and Catholic upbringing to Altman's mature sense of self was his service in World War II. After graduating from Wentworth Academy, Altman joined the United States Army Air Force at the age of 19. During the war, Altman flew an astonishing 45 bombing missions as the co-pilot of a B-24 Liberator with the 306 Bomb Group, 13th Air Force, in Borneo and the Dutch East Indies. His friend Frank W. Barheit later observed, all that he saw and all that he experienced and how long past the longevity of an average pilot he lived, 2009, Altman's friend, Garrison Keillor, put it more forcefully. When you have done that at the age of 19 or 21, you really have crossed the bridge, left your youth in Kansas City behind. And that's how you get the chance to die old and beloved and distinguished in California by being extremely lucky when you are 19 or 20. He really was a man who believed in his luck. When you've flown 50 missions in a B-24 Liberator bomber over the Pacific, what's the worst they can do to you in the movie business? Nothing whatsoever. Sukov, 2009. Also crucial to Altman's formation as a filmmaker and unique to him among his peers was his long and deep apprenticeship in industrial filmmaking and television work in the 1950s and 1960s. Many of Altman's younger contemporaries in new American cinema, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Paul Schrader, and Terrence Malick, were the products of graduate film programs. Altman's training was strictly on the job. Following unsuccessful war stints in Hollywood and New York City, Altman moved back to Kansas City in 1949 and worked as a writer-director for the Calvin Company, an educational and industrial film production outfit that was the largest and most successful film producer of its type in the United States. Over the next 8 years, Altman wrote and directed some 65 16mm industrial training films and documentaries for the Calvin Company and learned every imaginable aspect of the filmmaking process from the ground up. In 1957, he released his first full-length fiction film, The Delinquent, a Kansas City-based teen exploitation opus purchased for distribution by United Artists that resulted in a tidy profit for Altman and a return to Hollywood, where he co-directed The James Dean Story, 1957. Bit more to come. A feature-length documentary put out to capitalize on the burgeoning James Dean youth cult that emerged after Dean's death in a car crash in September 1955. Altman subsequently spent his next decade as a TV director, directing more than 120 half-hour episodes of some 24 network television series, most notably The Millionaire, Whirlybirds, Troubleshooters, U.S. Marshal, Bonanza, Bus Stop, and Combat. After what could be termed a 20-year apprenticeship, Altman's career was a Hollywood film director. Altman's career as a Hollywood film director began in 1967 when Warner Brothers' Seven Arts hired him to direct Countdown. In a low-budget space flight drama starring James Caan and Robert Duvall, a project from which he was ultimately fired by Jack Warner for allowing overlapping dialogue. Larger cultural changes he lived through also shaped Altman in profound ways. Raised in affluent circumstances in Heartland, America, in a relatively innocent time, Altman was thrust into postmodernity by World War II and then sexually and emotionally liberated by the post-war cultural thaw that soon followed. Though orderly and driven in his work habits, Altman was a hedonist by disposition. He lived large, worked compulsively, and played hard. He was a heavy drinker and a marijuana enthusiast throughout his adult life, manifestations, perhaps, of a naturally ebullient personality, but perhaps more likely indicative of a man struggling to escape or insulate himself from insoluble inner contradictions. All the facts just alluded to, Altman's innate temperament, his family background, his Catholic schooling, and his war service, his protracted apprenticeship, made him a disciplined, resourceful, and technically proficient filmmaker. The banality of so many of the film projects that were thrust his way in the early years also made him careless, a restless innovator. That to allay freedom and dress up otherwise cagneyed material, Altman experimented with visually exotic locations shooting, inventing sound techniques, unorthodox camera work, and other facts used to support artifice and these techniques, and also came to understand that his preferences for exploring human character and relationships over linear, plot-driven scripts depended upon an abiding cast of the creativity of his actors. And he told an overview. When I cast a film, most of my creative work is done. I have to be there to turn the switch on and give the actors encouragement as a father figure, but they do all the work. All I'm trying to do is make it easy for the actor, because most of the way you start to shoot, the actors is the artist. Also, I have to give them their confidence and say that they have a certain amount of protection so they can be creative. I let them do what they became. I let them do what they became as actors for the first time, place to create. Stevenson, Jr., 2012. Well, I'm going to stop there for now. But I'll be back to that.